A brilliant former student of mine, who's now a developer at Google, told me what was the most important thing I ever passed on to him. I was very happy. I was very happy that something I taught him had been useful to him, but I was even happier that he thought that that particular thing I passed on to him was the most important one of all. Because, on reflection, I fully agree with him on that. And if you stick around, I'm going to pass it on to you too. Welcome to Frank Staiano Explains. I'm a full professor in the Department of the Science and Technology of Computers at the University of Cambridge. And I am a fellow and a director of studies in computer science at Trinity College, Cambridge. In these roles, I enjoy the privilege of mentoring outstanding individuals who then spread their wings and go on to achieve greatness elsewhere. And it's very rewarding when one of them turns up 10 years later and we get to catch up on life with mutual esteem. I run this channel as a public service to help other interesting people I might never get to meet in real life. If you find my videos interesting, then please hit the like button. It costs nothing to you, but it really helps the channel become more visible to other people who might like it. So this young man I'm talking about did his undergraduate degree in computer science here at Trinity College, Cambridge. I was not his director of studies because I was not yet a fellow of Trinity at the time, but I was already lecturing in the department and I was his lecturer for the Algorithms course, both Algorithms 1 and Algorithms 2 in today's terminology, and Algorithms 1 you can get all my lectures from the playlist up there. And he stood out from the crowd of the other students because he brilliantly solved some of the optional programming challenges that I offered so as to keep the best students occupied. And then at the end of the 3 years, he completed his degree, he got a first, which is the highest grade you can get, and I immediately hired him. I offered him a paid job as a developer in the multi-year research project I was running back then. He was one of the members of my initial team for that project. Over the next 2 years, he made great contributions to the project, both in terms of the code he wrote and in terms of scientific papers. And I could see he was clearly, PhD class material. And he was a great chap to have around anyway. So I asked him if he wanted to do a PhD with me. He thought seriously about it, but he said no thanks. At that stage in his career, he just preferred to check out what the real world looked like. And I greatly respected him for that. I thought he was great. So he got the job outside the university, then another one, and then he's now at Google up there with other brilliant people, just as he deserves. And we kept in touch by email, and I invited him back to Trinity for a nice formal dinner. We were all dressed up in our gowns, and we enjoyed some fine dining in the company of other fellows of Trinity and their guests, and we finally had a chance to have a good chat, which we both greatly enjoyed after several years, as plenty of stuff had happened in the meantime to both of us. So the reason I am a university professor rather than being in industry earning several times more is because I enjoy this mission of helping other people reach their full potential. And by the way, that's also why I teach Kendo in the evenings on a purely volunteer basis. I don't get paid to teach Kendo. So it's particularly rewarding for me when one of my former students comes back and I get to see that they're doing well. So I was really happy to see him and spend the evening with him. Anyway, we were enjoying delicious fillet steak. And he told me this: Frank, you taught me algorithms when I was a first-year undergraduate, and I really loved that. Then you taught me more stuff when you were my boss in that research project, and so on and so on. But do you remember that time, I'm amazed when people like you are able to juggle so many things, different jobs, different stuff. And I remember that one day you took me to your office, and you showed me your to-do list on your computer. And there were hundreds of items on this list, and you had written some code in Emacs to colorize them and categorize them and sort them and so on. And I said, yes, I'm still using that software today. And he said, okay, you told me that I had to make a distinction between what's urgent and what's important. And I think that that's perhaps the most important thing I learned from you. More than the algorithms, more than the coursework, more than the security stuff, more than the research bits and so on. Isn't that a bit fun? And when he told me that, I was super happy. And I told him I was. Because if I had only been allowed to pass along one thing to him, if there had been some kind of magical curse where everything I taught him he would just forget, except one thing that I could choose, well, I would have probably designated this very thing as the one worth retaining above all others. That's really the key to the kingdom. So let me elaborate a little on that. The starting point is that you're a brilliant individual, honest, capable, you work very hard, you have talent, and the better you are, the more other people ask you to do things. And so you get so many things to do that it becomes overwhelming. And even when you work super hard from morning to evening, there's still more things to do. So the first thing to do is to dump all these things onto a piece of paper, or maybe in a text file. Make a to-do list. That's useful for many reasons. First of all, it frees up your mind from having to remember all those things. Otherwise, much of your time, if you have so many things to do, is spent worrying that while you're caught up in all this stuff that's bothering you and overwhelming you and blah, 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 you might be forgetting something that you were supposed to do, and then you'll be in trouble when people ask you, well, where is it? And that's a net loss, not just because it puts you in a bad mood, you're always kind of on the defensive and so on, but also because it distracts you from actually doing things. The time you spend worrying or trying to remember is actual time you could spend doing stuff. So if you dump all the tasks in a to-do list, then you no longer have to waste time worrying about forgetting them, and you have mental space freed up to devote to doing actual work, instead of managing the work that in the meantime you're not doing. So frees your mind, frees your time, big win. But the second reason why it's useful to dump stuff in a to-do list is because once you have this list, when you complete an item, you can cross it off. And this gives you a sense of accomplishment. It's like giving yourself a pat on the back. And this really even has a neuroscience explanation. Being able to tick off the completed task releases some dopamine, a natural endorphin. It's a biochemical reward that makes you feel good, as you deserve for having accomplished something. And this sets up some kind of positive feedback loop, a virtuous circle, whereby you want to complete more tasks so as to get that enjoyable dopamine kick again. And the third reason why it's useful to make a to-do list is because then you can see all your things at once, since you typically have many more things than you can keep in your head in your working memory. And when you see them at once, then you can decide which one to do next. And this is the crucial point for moving up to the next level of mastery of your own time and your own life, deciding which thing to do next. And I told him, I had been using to-do lists for many years before I finally realized an essential point. A lot of the advice you hear about productivity and to-do lists and getting things done, including advice in a rather popular, but in my opinion quite overrated, book by that same name, is actually total rubbish, because it's predicated on the assumption that if you follow these suggestions, you will be able to complete all the items in your to-do list. And I foolishly believed this propaganda for years. I thought I was a failure because my to-do list had things that I was actually never getting around to doing. But that if only I became more productive, more efficient and so forth, I would finally one day be able to cross out all the items, get to a clean slate, and from then on I would complete things as they came along and life would be wonderful. That is total poppycock. It's a false promise. And when I finally understood that, my life changed. So understand this. There are things on your to-do list that are never going to get done. Ever. Never, ever in a million years. You will die before you cross them off the list. Take this as an axiom. If you were able to assign a realistic estimate to the time needed to do each of the things on your list, and if you added all those times up, if your list is anything like mine, you'd see it would take several lifetimes. So it's just a fact, it's pure arithmetic. There are things on your to-do list that will never get done. There. That's a crucial cornerstone we just laid down. It's very important. Pat yourself on the back. Dopamine kick. Feel better about yourself once you digest and internalize that. This will allow you to move a step higher. So, what follows naturally from this axiom? There's a very important corollary to that, which is equally crucial for you to really internalize and make yours. We must observe that, of course, not all items on the to-do list are the same. Some of them are more important than others. Some of them you kind of have to do, like, have to answer that email, doing this favor to this guy, completing this, preparing that, but they don't really move the needle. Whereas some other things that you've been putting off, if you actually got around to doing them, they would have a huge impact. If you did that, then eventually you'd get a promotion, or eventually you'd get your degree, or your relationships would improve, or you'd get the house you want, or your health would get better, and so on and so forth. So some items are important, some items are less important. Some items are very, very, very important, but maybe they're a bit scary, they require more work, and we put them off. For example, sorting out your pension. Okay, if you're an employee, sorting out your pension is a big deal. And if you're not an employee, then thinking about the pension that you should kind of prepare for yourself is probably even more important. Okay, making sure that your pension plan does what it should is pretty damn important. But we tend to put that kind of stuff off because it's complicated, it's boring, it's depressing, it takes a long time to understand it, and also it's usually very far in the future. Well, depends on your age, of course. But so typically, we decide we want to sort it out today. We leave it for some other day. But it's probably a lot more important than most of the other things we end up doing today. So, first of all, we must be honest with ourselves about how important each thing is. And we can do that by giving the item a priority. And a simple method is just to use 5 bins, put each thing in one bin, A, B, C, D, E, with A for things at the highest priority and E at the lowest priority. And for each item in your to-do list, you must assign one priority depending on how serious it is for you, for your life, if you do it or if you don't do that thing. Okay, and of course you don't want to put everything in the same bin. You have to have a spread for this thing to make any sense. And then you look at this list, anyway, and it's got 300 items, and more will be added to it every day. And of course, some of them you actually cross out because you're still working hard at actually doing stuff every day. But the point I'm getting to, the corollary of that axiom that some things on your list will never get done, is that it is very possible to keep yourself busy all day, working super hard, crossing off plenty of items every day of the year, and yet only cross out unimportant stuff, stuff at priority C, D, and E, and rarely even touch the important, but perhaps hard, things at priority A. And that is another crucial revelation you must understand and acknowledge. It is possible to work very hard every day and cross off plenty of stuff from your to-do list and still not move the needle, not make a meaningful impact on your own life. You end up just chugging along pointlessly in a tunnel without light at the end, okay? You're going to be very busy if you're only crossing off items at medium or low priority. If crossing off plenty of to-do items makes you feel productive, you're deluding yourself. You're giving yourself the dopamine kicks, but you don't actually deserve them. That's not what matters. What matters is not how many items you crossed off today, but how many important items you crossed off. And remember, some things are never going to get done. I can't tell you which ones, but it is impossible to do all of them. So it's important that you choose wisely which are the few that you will get done, because you have finite resources to put towards that. You don't have the time to do them all, and you just can't hope to do all of them. Now, plenty of the things that come your way, that you feel you must do, or that others ask you to do, come with some urgency. Okay, this thing is very urgent. It must be finished by Friday. Or it must be finished by end of today. Or before lunch. So you drop everything else on the floor to do that. Well, that's wrong. That's perhaps the recipe for pleasing the person who's asking you to do that, maybe your boss. But that's not the recipe for achieving the things that matter in your life. Of course, you must be aware of how urgent things are, when the deadlines are for each of your to-do items, and you must ensure you don't miss the deadlines on important things. If something is both important and urgent, then you can't help dropping everything else on the floor in order to do it. I mean, you must. But you don't want to be in that situation. It's very messy and it's stressful and it does not lead you to performing at your best. So you should plan ahead and ensure you never have to deal with stuff that is both important and urgent. Because that's crisis time. That's emergency time. It should be exceptional. It should be something that you do when the house is on fire. And with proper planning, you can avoid it. You can make sure your house isn't on fire. And the way to deal with that is to do the important things first before they become urgent. And ignore the less important things, even if they are urgent, even if people are very vocal about asking you to do them if they're not important. Just don't feel bad if you don't do something urgent but only moderately important, if the reason is that you are instead doing something that's much more important. And there's plenty more useful stuff that we could say about this, the Eisenhower matrix, and Stephen Covey's wonderful book about the 7 habits of highly effective people. And you could develop elaborate systems around that, and the software that I'm using myself. And if you're keen, then just ask me about it in the question. I'm happy to elaborate in a future video. But the simple one-liner summary is this: understand the difference between urgent and important, and treat your to-do items accordingly. If you just keep yourself busy with things that are urgent, and you leave important things behind, then eventually everything becomes urgent, including the important things that you previously put off, and you end up in big do. The difference between the time management strategies of the mediocre, the good, and the exceptional performers is in how they choose what items to tackle from their to-do list. Successful people know that they will never ever be able to cross everything off, and so they choose wisely how to spend their limited time. And I explained that to him that day, many years ago, when he was a bit overwhelmed with all the stuff he had to do on the project. And it obviously stuck with him, and he remembered it. And he volunteered it back to me that this was the best thing I ever taught him. And I agree, it probably was. And I'm very happy if it contributed to making him the successful computer science professional that he is today. And if you make these principles yours, I am sure they would be equally beneficial to you as well. Best wishes.
And by the way, you may say Black Stallion in your comment to let me know that you watched till the end, for which I thank you very much.